Today, our facilitators will discuss cybersecurity, and our speakers today are the team with strategic solutions. Jay Strickland, CEO, Megan Papeo, security consultant, and Bill Lopez, CRO. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will receive a link to a brief survey. Please take a moment to complete this survey as it helps us to tailor future programming to fit your needs. Without further ado, I turn it over to Jay, Megan, and Bill. Thank you.
We, again, are just so excited to be here. Strategic Solutions have been open for more than 21 years now. We do IT managed services specifically for healthcare organizations. So we are always focused on making sure we're fitting the needs, answering questions, and doing what we can for our healthcare partners. If you were with us 2 weeks ago, we talked about emergency preparedness resources, and part of that emergency preparedness planning was doing an all hazards security risk assessment approach. We feel more than ever today, cybersecurity is one of those hazards that will likely come up. So we wanted to take some time today to sort of discuss what the landscape looks like, what you can expect, what questions you may ask yourself, and what you need to be doing to start planning. With that, I'll hand it over to Bill Lopez, co-founder of Strategic Solutions and Chief Revenue Officer, as he's a great resource for this sort of thing. Bill?
Thanks, Megan. So first off, really excited to be presenting today. This is an extremely important topic. I do a lot of these for various organizations and healthcare organizations across the state. So data is always changing. In fact, I was just updating my presentation this morning on some new data points that I think you all will find interesting today. So I want to mention first that part of this relationship with VCHA, we have also are going to extend to all attendees today a complimentary dark web scan and consultation. And we'll talk a little bit about that during the presentation, what that means and why that's important. And I'll mention it again at the end. And at the end, if you're interested in having that performed as your partner, we will do that. Just Megan will open that up at the chat box at the end for anyone that's interested, so we can reach out to you to schedule that. Before we get going in the presentation, there's a short video. It's 4 minutes long that we always open with. It is extremely powerful. The video really will tee up the rest of the presentation. So a couple of things. One, make sure your audio is turned up pretty good. The video does have the audio is a little low in some places, so I want you to make sure you can hear all of it. So turn up your audio to a point where it's comfortable for you. And then secondly, pay close attention to the video, because we're going to cover every aspect of the video throughout the presentation. And it really is the anatomy of a cyber breach or a hack.
How did you decide to become a hacker?
Well, I'm not really sure what it means to become a hacker. That's like some guy in a hoodie who types really fast and stays up all night writing code and cracking passwords. It's not me. I just spy on people and see what makes them click. It's not a bad job.
Mark Hannon, CEO of Qualicart, set to report earnings after their blockbuster IPO.
So you consider this a job?
I put a lot of work into this. I'm not lazy. It takes research to figure out the key players, learn all about them, their families, their friends, what they care about. You have to understand the company's organization. I get a lot of my information from the sales department because they're always so quick and eager. They're hungry. People trust too easily. They don't look at the details. I do. Details matter. That's what I'm good at. It has to look completely believable. It has to look familiar. This is where research is important. It's not some generic piece of spam. It's an email from their boss with their company's signature. It's written in the voice of the boss. It's what he would say if he were writing this.
What about the malware itself? How does that work?
Somebody else out there already wrote all the code that does the actual attack. I'm just using it in the attachment. My skill is in my ability to get a bunch of people to click on that attachment. I always wonder what it's like when the whole thing unfolds on their end, when the panic sets in.
Please leave your message after the beep.
Hey, this is Rajiv in finance. Call me as soon as you get this. Something's up with my laptop. I can't
Katie, are you
open
on your way
my
into the
files.
office? Something's going on with our file servers.
It's Karen in HR. Our benefits dashboard seems really slow. We're getting calls from users on it. Give me a call when you get this.
Joining conference now.
Apparently, there's a malware attack targeting our main...
It's ransomware. They're holding us hostage. We're locked out of everything. I can't even check my phone. What about the backup?
That will take days.
We need this fixed now. Pay it. We don't have a choice. We're reporting earnings in 2 hours.
But how do we know that
Just
they'll...
pay it. Put every single person on getting us back up and running. That's the only priority now. Okay, it's done. I have the decrypt key. Mark, we have a big problem. The ransomware was just to distract us. They got inside. They got everything. Customer data, financials, everything.
Qualicart is reeling today from the news that hackers have released the personal information of nearly
The
2
Nasdaq
million
closed
customers.
lower today, led by Qualicart, which was down 14% on news that their recent data breach may be far worse than the company
Its stock
originally
fell to a
acknowledged.
new all-time low on news that CEO Mark Hannon is stepping down after what is turning out to be one of the worst breaches of personal information in recent history.
Do you feel bad about releasing the personal information? All the financials? All the money that was lost?
All I did was get the files. I'm not the one that decided to release them. I'm not the one that shorted the stock. Somebody else had their reasons for that. It's above my pay grade. I was paid to do a job, and I did it well. And that's what's expected of anyone, isn't it? Anyway, markets bounce back.
All right, so I hope you were all able to hear that video and follow along with it. It is a very impactful video. I've seen that video probably, I don't know, over a dozen times now, and every time I see it, I pick up something new in it. So the reality is that the video indicates that you do not have to be a computer expert with coding or a hacker. The reality is that the cyber threatscape today is very decentralized. I know you've probably heard the term dark web in some capacity, and the dark web is really what facilitates many of these types of exploits. Think of it as Amazon for buying malicious code. So anyone can pretty much get on the dark web with the appropriate credentials, buy this code, and then trick people into clicking on it. So we're going to talk about how that whole process works. Okay, so I always like to open at this particular slide. It's a little dated, but it's still very much relevant. And this slide, Mike Rogers was the House Intelligence Committee chairman back in 2015. So even though it's been a few years, it's very true. There are two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that have been hacked but don't know it yet. And we see quite a bit of that. Many times when we are onboarding a new client, the first thing we will do is we will do what we call a bit of due diligence, where we'll run our tools, scan their environment. And what we find more times than we like to find is that there is some type of malware or code or indication that there was some sort of incident that had occurred and the client never knew about it. During 2020, those types of incidents increased exponentially. As you can imagine, during COVID, most everyone, anyone in any capacity worked remote. They worked from home, and because of that, we saw our data here shows that we've seen an increase of 350% in cyber crime or cyber incidents alone, and that was just during 2020. Those numbers continue to increase today. So what are our objectives today? We're going to talk a bit about cyber warfare, what that means, and why, what we're seeing from a threatscape standpoint as it pertains to that. We're going to talk about the SMB, or small, mid-sized business attack surface. SMB is pretty much what encapsulates any practice on this call. It's, by definition, it's any organization that's less than 900 people. And depending which source you Google, that number will, can change. Change in various increments, but bottom line is anyone on this call will be considered a small or mid-sized business. We're going to learn today about how we prepare and respond to these threats. not only from a business standpoint, but also personally. There's some things that you'll walk away with that you can put to use personally to protect yourself from being the victim of some sort of cybercrime. We'll talk about what the importance of having a systematic approach, right, which ties in directly to emergency preparedness. We'll talk about the approach and process that we're seeing that works very well for organizations when they need to respond to a cyber incident. And then we'll finish up with next steps. What are some things that you can take with you and put into play immediately within your practice? So let's talk about cyber warfare. Before we get into cyber warfare, let's talk about warfare in general. In warfare, the objective between the adversaries is to disrupt their environments. And that can be done in multiple ways, through supply chains, logistics, energy or fuel, equipment. We're seeing that. If anyone's following I'm sure you are, the conflict in the Ukraine, you hear about a lot of these types of things that are happening between the Ukraine and between Russia, and what they're doing to gain an advantage over one another. The same things apply with cyber warfare. And though we're not at war, the reality is cyber warfare is happening. Right now, we are seeing an increased level of threats from Russia to the United States and other nations, and it's primarily retaliation for the sanctions that have been imposed upon them. So it was already bad before. It's only going to get worse. I wanted to point out a couple of recent events just that tie into cyber warfare that I think will resonate with you. In December 2020, you might have heard this, SolarWinds, SolarWinds is a specialized software used to manage and monitor networks used by the Pentagon and multiple other State Departments, was infiltrated through an update. And this created a significant disruption, not only at the government level, but any other technology service provider that used SolarWinds as a tool, they were also impacted. In May 2021, there was the Colonial Pipeline issue, as you may recall, where the largest pipeline in the United States was shut down due to a ransomware event. And that was done through an exposed VPN connection. For those of you that use VPN to connect to your networks, you're familiar with that. Those that are not, it is a secure method to remotely connect into your network from home or from wherever. In May 2021, again, same time frame, JBS Foods, a worldwide supplier of beef, was impacted. They had to shut down multiple sites because of a ransomware event that occurred. They ended up paying $11 billion in ransom to get services restored. But the impact to JBS Foods and to their clients was immeasurable. And then most recently in April 2022, there was a malware infection in Ukraine that actually interrupted power for a good portion of the country. So you see the tendency here. It's about disrupting an environment, creating significant disruption in an environment. In this case, it was fuel, it was food, power. The one thing we haven't spoken about is disruption to healthcare, and that is what's of the most concern to us as a healthcare technology service provider and to our clients, is ensuring that we are having these conversations now, because it's only a matter of time before health systems and ambulatory healthcare practices start being targeted. So first, I thought it would make sense to talk a little bit about the threat actor types. Some of these terms are going to be new for you, but I thought it would make sense to at least give you a high-level overview on the different players that are involved in this. So from a state-sponsored actor, that is going to be any and every machine that's out there, server, desktop, etc. In this case, when we're talking about Russia, those are state-sponsored actors that are intentionally trying to create disruption in our country within various business types. The second type are organized cyber criminals. These are ones that they've got a specific target in mind. They're going after specific companies, specific assets. The third is hacktivists. To play off the term activists, they are primarily focused on what they are an advocate for. It can be a variety of things. but they typically will target corporations, maybe a corporation that doesn't have a policy they like, or maybe they were a disgruntled employee that was terminated and is looking to seek revenge, those types of things. Those are more of a hacktivist type threat actor. And then finally, the lone wolf. The lone wolf is pretty much operating independently, and they are typically targeting financial institutions. So why are small and mid-sized businesses great targets? Okay, I will tell you, I have this conversation a lot with practices this size. And I will tell you, for the most part, the reason they are great targets is because doctors, practice administrators, they have this sense that they're secure, that they're not a target. And that's because when you watch the news at night, you're only seeing the big companies that make the 6 o'clock news. You're seeing companies such as Capital One or Amazon Web Services, or a few years ago, Equifax, right? These are huge corporations. And because of that, a lot of the smaller businesses just get a little overconfident, believing that it's not going to happen to them, which is the actual opposite. Another reason they're great targets is because of absence of process. Most practices that we talk to are pretty much with the mindset that having a firewall and antivirus is really all they need to do. The reality is that the threatscape today is so complicated, there need to be multiple layers, and we'll talk about these in a bit, multiple layers on your workstations, on your desktops, multiple layers of process to ensure that you're doing everything you can to mitigate the risk of any type of cyber event. So absence of process, I would say, is another reason why small businesses are targeted. And finally, security industry. The security industry is really focused on the large corporations. So they're creating these very expensive, very robust security products, but they're for the large industries. And because of that, they're not a good fit for the smaller businesses, either because just what their features are or because of their price. So from that standpoint, the security industry is really focused on a market that it does not include the small and mid-sized markets. So even though 99.7% of businesses out there have fewer than 500 employees, the security industry typically is focused on a much larger corporation. Okay, so I don't know if anyone on this call has ever had a security incident, but some of the questions I get at different times are, well, if we're breached or there's an incident, what can I expect? What's the impact? So I wanted to share with you some things that we've seen over the years or heard through the industry that would create significant stress in any healthcare practice. Obviously, the number one thing is disruption of patient care. If your EHR is ransomed meaning the data is encrypted, and the only way the data can be unencrypted is if you pay that ransom. So when it's encrypted, your EHR, your practice management, anything you require, anything that's been encrypted will not work. It will not function. If that happens, there is no ability to schedule, update patient records, pull patient information, bill. All those things come to a grinding halt. So because of that, that's the number one impact that, as a healthcare service provider or a healthcare provider, that comes to mind. Beyond that, there are the other impacts, which are negative media exposure, depending on how large the incident is. Reputational damage, we've seen this. Most practices that get hit with an incident or a full-blown breach, they struggle recovering. It takes them months, if not years, to recover to where they were prior to the incident. So that's something to keep in mind. But beyond that, when there's a breach or an incident, you're going to have to engage an attorney initially to advise you on how to handle the situation. There could be lawsuits that come out of that depending what type of data was accessed. And then the potential for large fines from HHS, Health and Human Services. The challenge there is we've seen organizations that have had a security incident that recovered, but because they could not prove without a doubt that EPHI was not compromised, they have to report that as an incident to Health and Human Services, and then they'll do an investigation, and depending on their findings, there could be fines. And then The third bullet point here is many times the threat actors are looking to leap from business to personal. So depending on what type of information is stored in an environment, if there is HR information, for example, in there that they access, they could easily jump from not only business assets and information to an employee's personal information and access their assets. So you can see that there's a significant number of things at stake here when an incident occurs. And again, 60% of companies this is a statistic, but 60% of companies that have an incident of significance struggle to ever recover. So let's talk about breach methods, right? This is the really important part. So we talked about, okay, who's behind it, what are the things that could come out of it in the event that we have an incident. So how do we protect ourselves from it? How do we reduce our risk? So the first thing we have to do is we have to understand what the breach methods are. So I just covered 3. Unfortunately, there are more, but I'm going to cover the 3 most common. And I will tell you that of the 3, social engineering is the most common breach method. In fact, going back to the video, we'll talk a little bit about that. The video, the young lady in the video, that is the method that she used to infiltrate Qualcomm. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, how she did it, but I want you to be aware of that. We'll talk about malvertising, and then finally ATO, which stands for account takeover. So social engineering, again, the most popular method used to breach an environment. It's really 4 phases. Preparation. So if you recall in the video, the young lady was on LinkedIn. She was on Facebook. She had specific individuals she was gathering information about, right? So she was collecting all this data. What she does with that data is she creates a fictitious relationship. She then uses it to infiltrate and pose as a legitimate person of trust to gain access to that individual. Exploitation is the 3rd phase. The actor will then use persuasion to access information such as account logins, payments, etc. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I get on LinkedIn and I notice that someone has just made a post on LinkedIn. They just started at Acme Insurance Company. They just started today. They're extremely excited about the new team environment, this, that, and the other. So I can take that little bit of information, contact that Acme Insurance Company, ask to speak to that person, and I can position myself as, hi, I'm Bill Lopez with IT. I'm working on getting all your credentials set up. I need you to, if you can, go ahead and give me your username and password that you've been assigned so I can document that. And by the way, I also need your social security number as I'm going to be transitioning. I'm going to be sharing that information with HR. First day of work, you're going to probably believe this is all actual. And that is an example, very simplistic example on how social engineering works. I've gone online, I collected information, I created a fictitious relationship or a fictitious position for myself where that person would be having conversation with me, and I would use that to access information. Final phase is disengagement. As soon as I've done that, I step away, I'm gone, I've taken that information, and I'm gone, and I'm doing my dirty work. The employee doesn't know any different. They're not going to question. They're just going to continue to move forward. So no one really knows how that information was accessed except for the threat actor. So that's just a very simple example of social engineering. So let's talk a little bit about ransomware, because I know that's a big question on everyone's mind. What is it? How does it work? So ransomware is nefarious code. It is code that is sent primarily in email attachments or in links within email. So what the threat actor does is tries to send a fictitious email to you, getting you to click on it. So again, I go back to the video. The young lady created an email account that looked realistic. It looked like a Qualcomm email account. She knew who to send it to. She created some dialogue that she was a member of the sales team. I'm sorry, that she was the CEO. So she created a fictitious email from the CEO they're sending out to the sales team and other members of Qualicart, and because of that, they thought it was real. They opened it. Well, when they opened it, they clicked on a link. That link downloaded malicious code, known as an exploit. The exploit then reaches out to what we call the mothership, where it continues to download a ransomware payload. All of this is happening in the background. You don't know what's going on, and it downloads that ransomware payload where it will then park itself in that environment and start working its way through the network infrastructure to create havoc. This is a very high-level example on how this works, but understand that the important point to take away here is it typically comes in through an email attachment or a link by someone that you trust or you think you can trust, causing you to click on it. I've created some examples here for you, I brought some examples for you to check out that are very subtle, but are examples of emails that that were used for this purpose. So this is a FedEx package notification email, and if you look at the from area, you'll notice where the highlighter comes in that there are multiple letters added in that email address. Would be really hard to pick up if you're just looking very quickly because the graphic is so spot on. But in the email, you'll notice a couple of extra letters. That's an example of someone spoofing an email to get you to click on an attachment. Here's another one from ADP. This one's interesting. So when you look at the highlighted area, you'll notice that the grammar is a little off. The first four letters, please not to apply. So typically when you see grammar like that, it doesn't make sense. That is typically written by a threat actor from a foreign country. Sometimes they don't do the quality control on the text that comes out, and their grammar isn't spot on. So that can be a telltale as well that this is not a legitimate email attachment. And then finally, just the old email to HR with a resume. The problem here is that resume is in a zip file, which is a compressed file, and you should never open a compressed file that comes into your email like that without running it by your IT resource first to make sure it's okay to open. So we talked about social engineering. Now we're going to talk about malvertising. Malvertising is malware being cloaked in an advertisement. So if you're on Facebook or you're on just about any website today, you see the blinking icons that are talking about discounts or some sort of widget, some sort of product that may catch your eye. More times than not, if you click on those links, they're actually Trojan horses for a malware download. And sometimes you'll click on this, you'll go to a website that doesn't look exactly like what you would expect to see, but what's happening is there is malware being downloaded in the background unbeknownst to you, and that's the most common method of malvertising, which is legitimate looking ads with malicious code on the back end. So again, be very cautious. I would recommend not clicking on those types of links, but if you're going to, be very cautious in doing so. So the final breach method we're talking about today is account takeover. This is one that is really starting to gain a lot of ground. Here's how it's done. So typically, you'll get an attachment or you'll get an email in your inbox. There'll be an attachment that, let me give you an example. It may be an attachment for a voicemail. And so you're curious, what is this voicemail someone sent me? You click on that attachment, and what it will do is it will prompt you to log in once more before opening that attachment. When you log in the second time, you're actually disclosing your credentials, your username and password. So now it makes it extremely easy for a threat actor to access your email. And what they do with that many times is that they will use it for multiple things. They will look at what type of email interaction you're having within the staff. For an example, if you're a practice administrator or a CEO you may be sending financial information to your accounts receivable or payable or your controller. Many times they will pay attention to that. They will then look at ways they can send an email to your accountant or your controller to have them send funds to a specific destination they want, because it looks it's completely legitimate. It's coming directly from you. Secondly, what they may do is they may send malware attachments to multiple individuals, multiple other leaders within your address book. They will send those malware attachments to them as well. So they will be opening what they believe is a legitimate email from you, but they're actually clicking on something that is going to be bringing malware into their environment. So it's they can also do this in a manner that you don't even know it's happening. They will actually modify your email rules so that when an email is sent out, it automatically deletes it. So you never see that an email was sent from your account. It's sent and then deleted, so you never knew what ever happened. So account takeover is a big deal, and we're going to talk a little bit about how do we get to that point. So one way is, like I said, you click on a link, it prompts you for your username and password. The second way, which you have the most control over, is not using your email address, your company email address, for anything but company email. And what I mean by that is with mobile apps and newsletters and discount information from various companies, many people will register to be notified of these things as a consumer. And when they do this, it requires an email address and a password. More times than not, people will use a business email, and who wants to remember an extra password, they will use their company password in most cases. So when that happens, you've now given your username and your company email to this specific entity. Okay, let's say it's Jersey Mike's. Okay, so you've given this information, you've registered for Jersey Mike's, so now you're going to get updates on sales or discounts. Well, threat actor comes along and hacks into the Jersey Mike's database. When they do that, they gain access to all of those accounts. Now they take those accounts and they take them to the dark web and they will sell them. Someone will buy those accounts on the dark web, like that young lady did, and start hammering those specific accounts to see what they can get access to. So again, you can see there are multiple ways that this information can be used. It's sold and how it can be used to work against you. Primary targets from account takeovers are, I talked about email, but that's not where it stops. So it's email, it's VPN, which is your remote secure access. It can be your Windows authentication, and it could also be financial or banking, things like that. The good news is on the banking side, most any online banking is done with what's called two-factor authentication. You have to get a code on your cell phone. I'm sure everyone on this call has probably done this before. You get a text or you're running a specific application on your cell phone that allows you to authenticate twice. And when you have that, the likelihood of anyone being able to get that information is really nil. So two-factor authentication. All right. So how do we respond to these types of threats, right? So how can we protect? How can I protect my organization, and how can I protect me? So first, to protect your organization, we want to make sure that if you haven't done this yet, that your IT service provider implements multi-factor authentication, right? This is key. Even if they have your username and password for your email, as long as you're using multi-factor authentication, it's just about useless. They cannot access your email. Secondly, don't ever use company email addresses or passwords for anything but company business. It's too much of a risk to try to use them outside the company, so make that your new habit. Third, if you have to have another email address, just get a Google Mail or a Yahoo account that's a catch-all that you don't care about. Use that for those sort of things. And then the next one, I'll talk more about this later. See something, say something means that if you're an end user and you see a strange email, or you get a weird attachment, or your screen looks funny when you go to a website, if you see it, say something about it. Raise an alarm, because you could be a hero. You could be notifying someone in IT that this is happening, and it gives them a chance to contain this event versus not mentioning it, and then 5, 6 other people have the same thing happen to them, and then it turns into a complete disaster. So if you see something bizarre, raise your hand, tell someone in IT, tell your direct report, let someone know about it. How do I protect me? So again, a lot of the things that apply in business apply personally, but many people, from a personal standpoint, have 5, 6, 7 different things they log into on a daily basis. They're logging into their Comcast or Verizon account. They're logging into their own Gmail account. They're logging into their bank. They're paying bills online. All of these things, and with all of them require a username and password. So rather than use the same password for everything, use different passwords that are complex for each of those, but keep them stored in a repository that is encrypted and will protect those credentials. I listed one here as an example. There are multiple ones on the internet you can check out. A lot of these will let you do this for free, but the one in particular I put on here as an example is lastpass.com. So you can go to that website and you can check that out, see if it's a good fit for you. But that's a place, think of it like a vault where you can keep all your personal passwords, and that way you don't have to worry about trying to remember them. Multi-factor for any internet-based apps. If you are doing bill pay online or anything like that, ask the company you're doing business with if they have a multi-factor option, so that you can participate in that, because that will also again add another layer of protection to you as a consumer. Third, there are two websites here I've given you that, if you're curious, you can go out and look for your personal email account to see if your personal email account is on the dark web, your Gmail account or your Yahoo. You just type in one of those websites, in this case, haveibeenpawned.com, and you can just type in your email address, and it will tell you whether or not your account is out there. If your account is out there, the first thing you want to do is change your password for that particular account. But that's a utility you can take advantage of at no charge. The next two are more optional. Some people are comfortable doing this, some people aren't. But if you're not someone that is going out there and doing a lot of getting a lot of credit or loans for real estate, personal real estate investments, things like that, it's a good idea to freeze your credit with all 3 bureaus. And this is free. You can get your credit frozen. And what that means is, if you have your credit frozen, and let's say that I get access to your personal information and I want to open a credit card account, or I want to do I want to take a loan out in your name, I can't do it because the account's been frozen. The credit bureaus have your account frozen with them. Therefore, nothing will be able to happen there. In the event you do need to get those unfrozen, this is regulated, so you can actually have your credit unfrozen. And I believe what I've been told is that you can get it unfrozen within an hour. So just by calling the bureaus. So I would recommend looking into this and see if this is something that you want to do personally, but definitely worth looking at. And then for purchases that are made online, use credit cards as much as possible versus a debit card. My understanding is that credit cards just have, from a fraud standpoint and from an insurance liability standpoint, are going to do a better job than a debit card, depending which bank you're with. But check into that as well. Obviously, never send cash. But these are some things that you can put in play personally that will help you, very similar to what you can put in play from an organization standpoint. So how do we respond to these threats? So talk about a lot of things. From an IT service provider, there are some things that we do, and these are some things you can take back to your IT service provider or your in-house IT and share with them and see if they're doing these things. We take a layered approach to it, so very similar to what bulletproof glass looks like, multiple layers of glass and polycarbonate versus a single pane of glass. We use a layered approach. We're going to cover those briefly here. So the 3 layers we look at, or 3 pillars, are technology, process, and people. Okay? From a technology standpoint, these are the things that you want to have in place, right? So these are things, feel free to take we'll send this presentation out, I believe, but also feel free to take snapshots with your cell phone if you like. But these are the things that, at a minimum, you should have in your environment on any desktop, any server, to protect or mitigate risk from a security incident. Firewalls, pretty common sense, antivirus. I think the important thing with antivirus is the latest version is antivirus with EDR. Your system backups are also going to be extremely important. In the event of a ransomware event, having solid system backups will increase your likelihood of getting back online without having to pay a ransom. So ensure that your backups are happening daily and they are being tested. That's the important thing, daily and tested. You don't want to have to test the restoration of a backup during a crisis. You want to be, doing that ahead of time to make sure that when you do need it, it's going to work. Your patching and your updates, those are your Windows patches. Make sure that those are happening regularly on a weekly basis. Web content filtering is a solution that allows your end users to, if your end users are going to a website that has malicious code on it, or they're being directed to a website that has malicious code on it, a web content filtering solution will prevent that from happening. It will detect it, and it will prevent them from going to a website that has malicious code on it. Spam and email filtering. This should be run if you're using, for example, Microsoft 365 or you're using Exchange internally. You should have a spam and email filtering solution that accompanies that. That will ensure that any attachments or links that are in those emails are filtered first for any type of malware. You want to make sure you have that piece. Dark web monitoring, we talked about that a little bit. You want to make sure that if any credentials from your organization end up on the dark web, that you know about it, so that you can address that with the end user, get their credentials, get their passwords changed. But dark web monitoring is another important piece. And then third-party access. Just about every healthcare practice has a third party that has some sort of connection in their environment, be it labs, radiology, referrals, billing, uniforms, you name it. There is some third-party access typically in most medical practices. We want to make sure that those third parties are basically doing their part to mitigate risk on their side. Because if they are breached, the threat actor can easily come into their environment, come across the connection into your environment. So we want to make sure that you've evaluated and that they have been vetted, that they're doing everything they can to reduce the likelihood of any type of malware leaking out of their infrastructure into yours. Process. So again, this is high level of what we talk about when we're talking about defensive proficiency. The first is we're talking about risk management. What are the things in place in your organization that, from a technology and from a training perspective, that you're doing to reduce the risk of an incident from occurring. Second is your information security policies, acceptable usage policies. How are those being enforced? Do you have those? The third is cyber liability insurance. This is a question I ask quite a bit, and believe it or not, more times than not, the answer I get when I ask a healthcare practice if they have cyber liability coverage is no. Many of them are using a rider on the back of their med mal for each physician, and I believe that maxes out at $100,000 per physician, and that just is not enough to cover all the things that will have to be covered in an incident response. So if you don't have cyber liability insurance, I recommend that you definitely contact a broker. We're happy to help with that as far as sharing some contacts with you there that you do some research and get a better understanding of what that looks like for you. Breach response team. In the event of an incident, you want to ensure that you have a team in place, specific roles and responsibilities assigned to them, and they're ready to go. Let me give you an example. It's the equivalent of a disaster recovery team. You want to make sure that you've created this team with specific roles and responsibilities and rehearsed these things ahead of time so that when the incident does occur, you're ready to go. It's no different than the Red Cross showing up in New Orleans during a hurricane. Their disaster recovery team is roles, responsibilities. They have a process. They've rehearsed this, and that's why they're so effective when they go on site to administer care. It's the same thing here with an incident response, breach response team, and we'll talk about this on a later presentation. We actually have one specifically catered around that, but this is an important component from a process standpoint. And then the last piece is remediation proficiency. What is your containment process look like? Removal and forensics. Forensics are key. If you are leveraging cyber liability, it is imperative that the crime scene be untouched. that forensics or the data be left intact. Many times we've seen, unfortunately, where there's been an incident and the IT service provider came in and they removed the malware and they did the cleanup. But when they did that, they also removed any forensic information that would have been used by the insurance company to fulfill a claim. Without the forensics, they typically will deny the claim. So these are things that are really important to keep in mind and to have a process around. And finally, people. People are the weakest link in the chain. So from a technology process people standpoint, this is the most vulnerable because people make mistakes. It's the approaches that are being used today are getting more and more sophisticated. They're getting more and more tricky. So how do we protect our staff or our people from how do we arm them as much as we can to prevent a mistake from being made? Well, it starts with culture. We have to have a culture, we believe, where security is top of mind. It is something that is discussed in weekly meetings. It is something that is comfortable for the staff to be able to talk about if they see something on their desktop and they want to share that information, they see something bizarre in an email. Creating a culture where it's top of mind is one where everyone is comfortable sharing that information. Second is education. There should be security awareness training that's happening on a monthly basis with testing. And when I say testing, I mean quizzes after that. So think of it as one of the things we do is our clients will watch a short video. After the video, they will take a short quiz to measure retention, and we share those results back with leadership team. There are solutions on the market that allow you to do those same things. So doing that also helps building that culture. Testing is more of a simulation exercise on a quarterly basis. Should be doing some sort of simulation email that goes out, kind of testing who clicks on it kind of thing, and measuring it. There again, you're measuring retention, you're measuring comprehension on the education your staff is getting. Do they comprehend it? Are they retaining it? Are they putting it in play? And then finally, management coaching. Again, I can't tell you how many times I've spoken at events where staff are just uncomfortable sharing that they've seen something because they're worried about they're worried about getting critiqued or they're uncomfortable with it. So again, creating more of a coaching environment, encouraging them to share that when they make a mistake or they see something bizarre, having that coaching mentality to help them understand where they may have made a mistake or listening to them when they see something that's not right. That is going to really help out as well. This is in my opinion, this is the secret sauce. This is the part where you can have the most impact in your culture is through the cultural piece. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars on technology. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you should find a budget that works to create a technology infrastructure that's going to mitigate your risk. But at the end of the day, even with the best technology, if an end user clicks on something or does something that introduces that incident, doesn't really matter. So that's the biggest bang for the buck, is spending the time on your staff. So next steps, some things you can take with you. We talked about some things personally you can put in play, some things that you should be asking your IT service provider or your in-house IT if they're doing for you today. But from a from the 30,000-foot view, what are some things that you should be thinking about right now? Is asking, have you done a third-party security risk assessment to benchmark your current security posture? And if you've been doing that, if you've done that before, are you consistent with it? It's something that should be done yearly, and it's not something you do and just put on a shelf. It's something that you do and you look at throughout the year and you continue to make progress with. So think of it as your roadmap, your security roadmap for the year, because when that assessment's done, it's going to come back with deficiencies. No one's perfect. No one's going to come back with an A++. You're going to get a report that says, hey, you could be doing this better, that better, should implement this or that. And that is your roadmap for the year. And you want to make sure that you are, as much as possible, making progress there. Second, if you have cyber liability insurance, make sure it's the right coverage amount. And make sure that your IT team is helping you meet the regulatory requirements. Cyber liability carriers have been burned in the last, in the first part, I believe the first part of 2021 alone, they paid over $6 billion in Bitcoin for ransoms. The insurance companies did. So many insurance companies are getting out of the cyber liability game completely because it's too risky for them. And the ones that have stayed in it are being extremely rigid on the things that you need to be doing in order to get coverage during a claim. So my point is, if you're paying premiums for cyber liability coverage and you have an incident, if the insurance company finds that you didn't meet your end of the deal with specific requirements, they will deny the claim. And we're hearing about this. We're hearing about this happening today. So make sure that you're meeting those requirements. Third is cyber liability, again, needs to be part of your company fabric. Start talking about it. Make it just as important as teamwork or anything else that you discuss with your organization. And then users should have an airport mentality. You know, if you've been in the airport, how many times have you heard, if you see something, say something? Same thing applies here to from a cyber standpoint. If your end users see anything that's not right or they have questions about, encourage them to bring it up.
Perfect. So to sort of wake you up and get you out of your seat, get you ready for some questions, we actually have a question for you. If the first person to answer this question correctly by putting their answer in the chat wins a $20 Amazon gift card. Our question is, of the 3 exploit tactics we discussed, account takeover, malvertising, and social engineering, which is the most common? Perfect. Oh, you guys are good. Quick, nice and quick too. You're right, social engineering is the most common, and it's also the one that we saw in that video. And we'll talk about that more. Thank you guys for your participation. And we do hope that you will be joining us in 2 weeks for our next webinar in the series, where we'll be talking about telehealth, especially as it relates to emergency preparedness and emergency preparedness planning.